If you're watching this podcast on YouTube and aren't subscribed, make sure and click the subscribe button, like, comment, let us know what you think about the episode. If there's a particular guest or topic that you'd like to have on, we love to check your feedback on there and then get your suggestions onto future episodes. Today I'm going to be chatting with Kyle from Hot Shot Secrets, and we wanted to talk about some of the ways people add lubricity to their fuel, some of the old school methods of adding ATF fluid, kerosene, two-cycle oil. So he's got some great data on it. I look forward to chatting with him today and learning about what they found through research and then how it compares to a fuel additive. Before we get to it, I want to give a shout out to one of our sponsors that helps make the Diesel Podcast possible. Kershaw Knives has a 40% off MSRP code for you. If you go to kershaw.kaiusa.com, use code 40TDP2024, get you 40% off MSRP, and they have a whole bunch of different choices for blade steel, blade shape, different handle designs, different opening mechanisms, and their whole lineup's designed to meet any budget. So if you're in the market, use that discount code and save some money. All right, let's get to today's podcast with Kyle from Hot Shot Secrets and chatting about ATF, two-cycle oil, even kerosene being added to diesel fuel, and how does it compare to a dedicated fuel additive? Kyle, welcome back to the Diesel Podcast. Excited to catch up with you today. I think you've been super busy over the summer, going to a ton of different races and events. I've seen you. It's kind of where's Kyle this week throughout the whole summer.
Yeah, I'm the Where's Waldo of diesel motorsports. So yeah, good to be back in the office and good to be chatting with you, Patrick. Always love coming on and talking nerd stuff about lubricants and catching up with what's going on in the industry.
The last episode we did, we were talking fuel additives, and there were so many comments and so many, just a lot of feedback and questions on YouTube. And I wanted to ask you, as I think you guys check them out, you guys see the feedback that listeners give. I wanted to ask you if there was any questions that you wanted to answer, things you wanted to mention from the last one where we discussed, is it worth running a fuel additive? What kind of benefits do you get? Do you even need to do it? For anyone who didn't catch that episode, definitely check it out. But yeah, I wanted to ask you, are there any follow-up statements, questions you wanted to answer?
Well, I think we'll probably get into some today. This is, one thing I really want to talk about today is kind of what I experience out in the field a lot at my vendor booths at races and whatnot. And we hear it a lot of times coming in of some really old methods of treating fuel and do they work and at what cost do they work, and are there better options out there? So I know last time we really kind of dove into how the fuel additives are working, why you need them. But I still get a lot of people that say, I've been doing it a certain way for a long time and I seem to have no problem, and I'm going to continue to do this way. And that's good. So I thought today maybe we put a little science behind it. We're powered by science here. So I got some data together, and we can kind of tackle some of these old methods of treating fuel and compare them and see, let the chips fall where they may.
That would be cool, because I've heard it through. I mean, I haven't been around diesel. I guess maybe it's kind of a while, maybe about 15 years or so. Like being
You've been around for a minute.
Yeah, and so I remember early on, some of the old timers would say, "Well, throw some ATF, in your fuel, or some two-cycle, or just different things that they would suggest to do." And well, I don't hear it as much now. I'm not at events all over the country like you are, talking with different people that are there for different reasons. So I'm not at the forefront of feedback for that stuff. But for someone who maybe doesn't know, or they just came across it, or they saw a forum post or a Facebook thread or something like that, what are some of the old school ways of doing it?
Well, you named the big ones there, and you're spot on. And there were, I think, quite a few comments on our last visit that people had mentioned. I've been using ATF. I think the good news to me is that people do understand that you need to be treating the fuel, that the diesel fuel is extremely dry, and how you lubricate that is where you have some options out there. I think some of the old schools of thought of using automatic transmission fluid, adding that to your fuel to provide lubricity. I mean, it sounds like a good idea. We all know these diesels, you can about put anything in there and they'll run, So adding a slippery oil to it, it's got to add lubricity, right? And another thing that they add, you mentioned, is two-cycle oil. and that's a common garage style additive to your fuel additives. And then we're approaching here this winter season, and it's getting cold, and very common thing to use as a home remedy of an anti-gel is kerosene. And a lot of people add kerosene to their fuel to prevent it from gelling. And all of these techniques, I'll say, work to some extent, but there are certainly better ways to do it, safer ways to do it, get better end results. And here's the crazy thing. It's cheaper. It is absolutely cheaper to use a good fuel additive than it is to use one of these old style remedies. So, we can kind of run through each of these, and I can kind of break down what's happening in each one of them too.
Yeah. Let's go through each one, and I want to learn as well and try to understand more. Because like I said, it would just be somebody who'd tell me, "Oh, throw this in, your injectors will get a little quieter," or, this or that, or whatever it might be. And I could never really find like specific data on dosage, on longevity, on other things like that. So I think it'll be great to go through maybe some of the testing you guys have done, comparing the two or where. And I know there's a lot of data that you guys have. So let's just go through them.
Sure. Well, let's start off. We'll set the table with the understanding that the fuel's dry, and you and I have been through this a million times, so we'll kind of breeze over this. But in the 90s is when they started the low sulfur diesel, and they wanted to pull the sulfur out of the diesel because it's bad for the environment. So it's an environmental move, and the process of removing sulfur from diesel fuel is what kills the lubricity in the fuel. There's a bunch of additives in fuel, components of the fuel that provide the lubricity, including the sulfur, and the process of removing all that out strips all the lubricity out. And then in the 2000s is when they moved to ultra low sulfur diesel and removed pretty much all of the remaining sulfur out of it. So through this process, it leaves us with an extremely dry fuel. And as you and I talk, there's a couple different kind of owners out there. You got the guy with the older truck, and then you got the guys with the new trucks. Certainly these older trucks never foresaw the fuel that we'd have today, and they were never built to have this dry a fuel. The newer trucks know what we got, but it's still too dry to really protect the system properly and everything. So I think that's the good news, that people understand it's dry and that they need to be adding lubricity to it. But how you do that is what's in question here. And another thing is I kind of want to explain is how we measure this. And there's a lot of ways to test out there, but the industry standard for, which is called a wear scar test, is an ASTM D6079. Am I got that memorized right? I'm not sure. I will back. Yep, I nailed it. ASTM D6079. I finally memorized it after all these years. So let's talk about that test first of all, so we can understand how we're measuring lubricity in fuel. And it's a wear scar test. So you literally have it's a 10 millimeter disc that it's about the size of a BB. It's, I think there's 6 millimeter ball is put on this disc. And the fuel is added, and that's the only thing lubricating this ball on this disc. This little BB takes a 200 gram load, and it rubs back and forth on that at a rate of 50 times per second. And they keep this test going for, I believe it's 75 minutes at 60 degrees. Once that time's over, they take a measurement. And I've got a bunch of wear scar testing. These are actual wear scar results that I can share with you. Maybe we can link to later so people can see. And what it shows is it's under a magnifying, extreme scope. It'll measure how large of a gouge is taken out of the ball. People often think it's the plate. It's actually the metal ball, and they measure that gouge by microns because it's very small, And the more that is gouged out of that metal, the worse the lubricant is. The more wear you're having, the less the lubricity is playing in that fuel. So a really good wear scar is tiny as can be. Yeah, that means you got a very high lubricity, and it's doing a good job protecting your fuel system components. The standard in America is a max of a 520 micron wear scar. So you can rest assured that everything you're getting out of the pump is at worst a 520 wear scar. They should be testing that. You might see the stickers on pumps. That means that they've been tested. So at the pump, a lot of times, you might see the sticker on there that it's telling you it's been checked. But obviously, as we've talked in the past, fuel can change day to day, and we've tested a lot of fuel that does not, meet that spec. Most of the time that you are under that 520 micron wear scar. Now, we've talked in the past also about the European standard that is a 460 wear scar, where they like a little more lubricity in the fuel. And actually, the American engine manufacturers agrees with European standards, and they recommend a 460 as well. So that's the number we always look at. We always want to see fuel under a 460 micron wear scar. Sometimes you get it straight from the pump that way. Sometimes you don't. Hopefully the worst you see is a 520. So I just kind of want to set the table on how we test that. So we can test fuel all the time, and we take it through the wear scar test and see what the result is. So we've done tons and tons of testing of baseline fuel. And today I'm going to share with you a lot of this data that we've done. We do blind third-party wear scar testing, and we send out the samples to a third-party lab, and we start with a baseline fuel, and then we keep that same baseline fuel, and we test multiple other competitor additives to kind of gauge where we stack up in the industry. And the last time we did a batch of this, we decided to throw in, rather than just a bunch of fuel additives against the fuel, we threw in ATF, threw in some trans fluid in one, and we threw in some 2-cycle oil as well, just so we could kind of help explain this to the people that are still not using any additive, but using one of these old school remedies. And so that's just kind of that's why we have dry fuel, and that's how we test it. So if you want, we can kind of talk about ATF. You want to jump into that first?
Yeah, I'd love to jump into the data comparing ATF and 2-cycle to the standard that you just explained.
So one of the unique things with the ATF is we often see, one of the things we always are concerned with is treat rates too. So how much additive is in the bottle of additive that you're really using. And so I always encourage people to make sure they're looking at their treat rates. Sometimes they look at the cost of a bottle. I mean, a bottle may cost $20. Well, that's great. Well, how much use are you getting out of it? How much fuel does it treat? And so when we did some testing on transmission fluid, the question is, well, how much are people out there putting in? Are they pouring a little bit of trans fluid in? Some guy might put a lot. I know people say, I throw a quart in every time on a full tank. Well, how big's your tank? So treat rates are very important. I mean, we live in a world of parts per million, in the additive world. So it's very important to get that treat rate and right. So when we did the trans fluid testing, we had to keep throwing a lot of trans fluid at it to move the needle. It is not bringing the lubricity that you think it does. So I believe on our biggest dosage here that we got it down to a 1 to 200 treat rate. Now, to put that into perspective, that means that you would be putting 1 gallon of transmission fluid per 200 gallons of fuel. So maybe, a 50-gallon tank, that would be treating it with a quart of transmission fluid, which is a heavy dose. To put that into comparison, our EDT, our everyday treatment, that's one of our most popular products, has a treat rate of 1 to 1280 at our performance dose, which gives you the extra cetane. And so that's a light years difference. We can use 1.5 ounces of this product to treat the same thing that we're putting a quart of transmission fluid in. And with the with the same balance there, a quart of transmission fluid in that balance, we reduce the wear scar of the base fuel from a 609 down to a 488. So the base fuel we started with was 609. That's bad fuel. I mean, that's, stuff you don't want. So this is raw, unadditized, baseline refinery fuel, super dry, and that we used for all of the tests. So everything started at a 609.5. And at a 1 to 200 dosage, it reduced it down to 488.5, which is that's how much we needed to get it under that safety zone to make it a safe fuel. And at that rate, a quart of transmission fluid is pretty expensive, So I think I even have the cost in here that we used for that test here. I got my sheets mixed up.
Yeah, I think of how often somebody would need to do that with the size of a fuel tank, and how often that they're driving. That could quickly start to add up per month, and throughout a whole year to treat 50 gallons. That I could see it getting expensive.
It does. It gets very expensive, and again, you're not getting much of a gain out of it. We saw we're getting that down to a 488, which is a 20% increase in lubricity. You're looking about 18 cents per treated gallon. So we already know we're paying enough for this diesel fuel, and now you think you're saving money by throwing in some trans fluid, but at 18 cents per treated gallon, all you're doing is getting that wear scar down into like the safe area at 488, but we're not really, obviously if you've got a CP3 out there or something, you want to get that down as low as you can. So not only does it require a huge dosage, it doesn't move the needle near as much, and it costs quite a bit. Put that in comparison, our everyday treatment, our EDT, costs about 4 cents per gallon to treat. So you're talking 4 times as expensive as a fully formulated product, and we've gotten into fully formulation before. So with this product, you're getting a cetane boost, an injector cleaner, the lubricity additive, a water demulsifier, a fuel stabilizer, a rust and corrosion inhibitor. We are packing a lot in that small 1.5 ounce dosage, whereas the replacement costs 4 times as much to just add some lubricity, not even to the level that a fuel additive can. So it's not cost effective. It's not, lubricity is not as effective. You're not moving the needle on that, and you're leaving a bunch of components off the table. If you still want to add cetane, or if you want to clean the injectors or stabilize the fuel or help disperse the water that we deal with in the fuel, you can get all of that and more for a quarter of the cost that transmission fluid cost, and have much better performance out of it. So it's not just a performance thing; it's a cost thing too. You're paying a lot more for less.
Yeah. And to recap, to make sure I understand, so the standard is supposed to be 520. The fuel you guys tested was 609. Adding that quart of ETF to 50 gallons brought it down to 480. But the standard that you guys like to get is below 460, and also in Europe they like to get it to a 460. So it didn't hit kind of that sweet spot. It got it down, but not near as much as where you'd like to see it, and for the increased cost, how much I'm going to have to treat it to get it down to not the number that I want to see. That puts it in perspective for me, because I've heard that forever. Even there was something I was reading recently where somebody was doing that, and my first question was how do you dose it? Because I've never seen a standard of like, because I don't think anyone per se in this industry is saying, okay, I'm going to put my name on this bottle of transmission fluid and sell it to you. And this is how you dose your 32, 36, or maybe you got a bigger tank, how you dose it. So nobody really knows, and you're just going off of somebody's kind of feedback or what they've always done. So I think
you nailed it too. I that's always my follow-up questions because I'm always curious about this. So when people tell me that they're using trans fluid, I say, how much? And I've heard everything under the sun, I mean, everything from a tiny bit to god awful amounts of it. And now here I will put this out there. You're not going to do any damage to the system. So anybody treating their fuel with trans fluid, I mean, unless you're putting so much in, you're diluting the fuel so bad, then we have some issues. But a small to a large dosage of it, a diesel engine's going to burn that, and you're not going to have any problems. You just aren't going to have the increase in lubricity, and most people are treating it less than we're a 1 to 200 ratio. Just in my from what feedback I've heard, we had to move it up to a 1 to 200 in these testings because we started with the kind of like the same dosage, like a 1 to 1280, like we use with our fuel additives, and that didn't move it at all. I mean, it went from a 609 to like a 604. So we had to keep adding more and more and more, and it took all the way up to a 1 to 200 dosage, rate to get it under that wear scar, the safe zone. So I mean, I don't know what everyone's doing too. I've seen it all over the place. So there isn't like a industry standard on how much trans fluid to put in there, because there really shouldn't be done in the industry, in my opinion.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How does the 2-cycle compare?
The 2-cycle is interesting too. I kind of feel like that's kind of come around a little bit, where I don't hear as much as the trans fluid anymore, but now I'm hearing more and more 2-cycle, and it's very similar. I mean, they're different fluids, but they're still, I mean, obviously oil-based fluids. I understand the thought. 2-cycle seems a little bit more fuel ready, if you will. You kind of hear about 2-cycle oil in fuel, so I get why people might try that, and I get where it kind of came from, maybe. But same thing, we put it through the same testing, just like we do with all the other fuel additives when we're comparing everything. We said, let's throw some 2-cycle in these testings, and so we can show some people. And sure enough, we had to get we went all the way to a 1 to 200 ratio again, which is a heavy dosage in our world. And we gave up at that point. The 2-cycle was so much worse than the trans fluid. At a 1 to 200 ratio, the 609.5 base fuel moved to 601.
Wow.
So 2-cycle oil does nothing to add any lubricity at all to diesel fuel. And then you even have to calculate your cost in that. It netted a 1.3% increase in lubricity, 609 to 601, and the cost per treated gallon was 40 cents per gallon.
Wow.
So, I mean, now we're talking 10 times as expensive as a product like EDT. You're going to pay 10 times as much, where you can treat the same per gallon at 4 cents per gallon with a product like EDT. And again, not only first of all, that doesn't even move the needle on lubricity at all. But you're not getting the lubricity gain, but you're also not getting 5 more components like injector cleaner and water demulsifier and stabilizer and all this other stuff that we can do with a strong fuel additive. So I'll give some kudos to the ATF that it can move the needle once you put a ton of it in there, and you can get to a safe zone. But at 18 cents per gallon, it's pretty expensive still. But 40 cents a gallon for 2-cycle oil that doesn't move it more than 1%, those guys are wasting their money and their time. And again, you're not hurting anything. Pretty safe for the system, but it's just not doing anything. And again, we can here's our ATF wear scar testing. And again, I'll share this with you. And right here on the back is the awful 2-cycle fuel testing there too. So it's just not performing, and it's not cost effective. It's just not the way to go.
With the testing, did you guys also put in some EDT to test the 609 base kind of rating on the fuel, and how'd that shake out?
So that is right here. And also, I can share this whole chart with you. It's got, I don't know, maybe 15 different fuel additives from other companies, and then Hot Shot Secret EDT, as well as our LX4 by itself. Because for those that don't know, LX4 is our lubricity additive inside the EDT. So we could actually compare LX4 apples to apples against, ATF or the 2-cycle. And that's probably a more fair comparison, because that's all you're trying to do with those products is add lubricity. I'm trying to make the point here to also show you that even for a quarter of the cost or a tenth of the cost, you can get 5 other benefits. But the testing on the baseline fuel again was 6095. The EDT brought that down to a 426. So we're well within the safe zone. The LX4 brought it down to a 211.
Wow.
So we're light years past the safe zone. And that's one of the good things about lubricity too. And it kind of goes into play of how poor trans fluid or 2-cycle oil really do perform. Lubricity is one of the few things as a fuel additive you can actually keep increasing. Like you can keep pouring lubricity in there to a point that you're diluting the fuel too much. But things like cetane, we can add cetane to some point, but there's a point of diminishing returns. So we usually set our dosages right at the peak of that gain curve, so you're getting the most bang for your buck. Fuel stabilizer, we can pretty much easily stabilize fuel for a year or two, and you throw more at it, it's not like it's going to stabilize it for 20 years all of a sudden. There's a limit to the water dispersants and a lot of these things. Lubricity is one of those things that you can add more to, and that's kind of why we offer our lubricity agent LX4 by itself. A lot of people might use our EDT for all the 6 benefits of it, but they want some added protection, some added lubricity, and you can top treat that to even get the wear scar down lower. So combining those two even gets you even lower. And it also shows you how bad the trans fluid isn't working even at a 1 to 200 doses. We're pouring a ton of it in, and then you're still just not moving the needle all that much. And clearly it didn't move at all on the 2-cycle after a 1 to 200 ratio. It was still only moved at 1%. So just better ways to doing this stuff.
Common question we get from you guys a lot is, hey, I need a diesel engine. I either, I can't wait this long to get one, or normal place I get stuff from it just takes too long, or they don't have the parts in it that I need. Maybe my truck's not stock, or I tow heavy with it. I don't want to go back with just a stock engine. DFC Diesel is a sponsor of the podcast. We worked with them, hand in hand on doing episodes, answering technical questions. They have a complete lineup of Cummins, Duramax, and Power Stroke remanufactured engines that are set to a standard of ISO 9001 2015 standards, which is a huge deal in the aftermarket. And there's certain levels of quality testing, validation that are required for that. So when you get one of those engines, the type of quality that's built behind it, with an industry-leading warranty that's really comprehensive. And the other thing with that is, sometimes the options that are out there, it's a basic OEM engine. You want a little bit more. You don't want to have the same failure again. So there's a bunch of different series of engines that they have, from core, street, tow haul, and also the Speed of Air series, which we've covered on the podcast before. There's a lot of really cool benefits to it. And if you have questions about that, reach out to them. If you don't know the type of engine that you're looking for, if you go to dfcdiesel.com, there's a ton of info there. You can send an email or you can reach out to them. Also, they're working with Speed of Air pistons, which it's the only piston that pays for itself. And there's a lot of really cool technology behind it. So you can add that into your build and be able to get better fuel economy, increased power, increased torque, and better engine life out of it. Some of the most common engine applications or series of engines that they have with that lead time, a lot of them are in stock or they have really short lead times. So you can check your favorite retailer or go to dfcdiesel.com, check them out, see what's in stock, see what you can get. If you have questions, maybe you want to do, something that's outside of the normal series of engines, they have tons of choices for rods, cranks, pistons, valve train upgrades, tons of different things. So if you're in the market, definitely make sure and head on over and check them out. There's a couple different parts of this where if I put different hats on as to which year range or what year truck I had, where this would like really concern me. One would be if I had an older truck that wasn't, if I'm thinking back to the 90s, like a 12 valve or a Ford, OBS Power Stroke, something like that. And you had mentioned, what those trucks were designed around for fuel compared to what you get in 2024. That would really say, hey, I need to do something to the fuel system. The other part is on some of the newer trucks and the wear that we see in the fuel system with injection pumps and other things pertaining to it. And then some of the repair costs associated with it, where even though these trucks were designed around this fuel, they still have wear, they still have issues, and we see it all the time. So it's a really interesting topic to me, because a lot of times talking about diesel or the aftermarket or parts or even just trucks, you really have to segment it into, is it a brand new truck? Is it 3 years old? Is it 10 years old?
Right.
And it might not apply. This applies to everything that has a diesel engine. And I've always been curious about the ATF 2-cycle thing, because I heard it a long time ago and people have talked about it. And I was curious, like when you're at an event and somebody says, nope, I just use ATF. I've been using it for 25 years. My engine's good. How do they react when you start to tell them some of the data, like from a test like this, and then the cost as well? As I think cost would be a huge thing. Like money's tight. Fuel's expensive. The trucks are expensive, or the repair parts for an older one can be expensive. And you're just dumping 40 cents, extra onto it or whatever it might be. That, I think that would really kind of hit me hard, would be, I'm not getting a lot of benefit and I'm spending 40 cents extra to.
Right. And in fairness too, I struggle when I talk to people like that. I'm normally not in the office where I've got access to the lab where they can give me all this stuff real quick. I am going to start carrying this stuff with me. So next time I have a guy, I can actually show him like the testing. I know it and I tell him about it, but I definitely want to be able to show some people this. So I will carry this with me going forward. But you're right. And I do think we work with a lot of agriculture stuff too. Some of these guys have, just drums and totes full of trans fluid and this type of stuff. They may not be paying 40, they may be getting it cheaper. So to them, putting some in, it's just a little bit out of their big jug. And I kind of can understand that. We can compute that down, and I guarantee you're not going to come anywhere near. You might be able to shave that price in half at best if you're buying in massive bulk as an agriculture, operation. But the average guy who's just trying to lubricate too, the financial side just doesn't make sense to it. And the other thing you brought up about the different types of trucks, the older versus the newer too, you're spot on, man. And it's tough to try to break old habits. I've always told you I'm in a tough industry where it's just everybody's all about the new injector technology and the turbo technology and anything new that comes out, people are on. Lubricants, people are like, I've been doing it this way forever. So it's tough, and that's why we try to educate, and showing actual data on this. I usually just ask, what's your end game? Like, I appreciate that somebody is attempting to lubricate their fuel. It's better than not doing anything at all. So, but I'd rather steer them in a way that they're protecting their system. And you nailed it. Like the older stuff is more prone to get beat up by this dry fuel because it wasn't built for it. And the newer stuff just costs so much. These fuel systems are so finicky and expensive. And we've had a lot of talks about the CP3 failures, and CP4 failures. And if you remember in that talk, this kind of goes into this micron testing, that European standard, you get under that 460 standard, we don't see as many failures over in Europe on these CP4s, but over here, since a lot of the fuel is above that 460 up to that 520, we see a lot more failures here. And again, the only difference in those pumps and trucks is where they're at and the fuel they're getting. So if you're here in America, then you can improve on the lubricity of the fuel. If you got an older truck, it certainly wants that fuel. And if you got a newer truck, you better protect that system, especially those CP4s, when they grenade, they shoot all downstream, and it's an expensive fix. And I know there's companies like S&S that have like the basically a catch can kit. Like the aftermarket has built stuff to protect it from when it grenades, not ruining everything. I mean, that's how bad it is. So it's much cheaper to just bring the lubricity up, get the wear scar down, protect your systems, whether it's an older system that wants the more lubricity in the fuel, or the new systems that just need it because they're so expensive and finicky.
We were chatting a little bit before the podcast, and I'm glad that you mentioned this next topic, which winter's right around the corner. I've noticed, the season's definitely changed, starting to get a little cooler at night, all that stuff. And once winter comes around, I'm sure you guys get tons of calls. I notice like episode requests kind of spike for, fuel gel and all that kind of stuff. And there was another additive that another thing that people add to their fuel in the wintertime, just kerosene. Yep. And I wanted to ask you about that. What kind of data, what kind of information do you guys have on that when we get into the winter season?
It's another one of those, I've been doing it forever, and I've been adding kerosene forever and never gelled up. And it is true, kerosene prevents fuel from gelling. And believe it or not, the fuel that you get out of the pump, I know in Alaska, they literally primarily treat their diesel fuel, from the refinery out to the pump is treated with kerosene. Most of the fuel that you get in the wintertime that have winter treatments has some kerosene in it. There are certainly much better additives to use. But again, this is kind of like the lubricity thing. It kind of makes me happy as a lubricant guy that people are at least thinking about it. I know a lot of people say, I treat my diesel fuel in the winter. I'm like, you should do it all year, but at least you're doing it, part of the time. So there's some consciousness out there. Like, I don't want to gel up. And then it depends where you're at, obviously. Some of the northern states that are used to the cold, they usually get better treated fuel at the pump. Certainly the guys down south that might travel north, they're the ones that often run into like gelling issue if they're bringing some southern fuel that's untreated. And just like we've talked in previous episodes, how different the testing is nationwide day to day on the anti-gel side to prevent the gelling. But kerosene indeed does prevent gelling. However, unlike we talked about earlier with the ATF and the two-cycle oil, kerosene can damage the system. It is not safe to use. It certainly dries out the fuel considerably. And I'm going to give you an actual example of that. One of the things that we always run into with it is, I believe it sits at a 700 wear scar by itself. So it is just dry as can be to start with. It's a dry fuel. At what rate do you want to protect your system, and from gelling and compromising all the lubricity in your fuel? So this is, I don't know, maybe these are the guys that throw ATF in and kerosene in, trying to attack it from like both sides. But there is a large percentage of kerosene added to number two, often at the pump in harsh climates like that. So it's something you gotta be careful with using. Using a true anti-gel agent is a lot better and performs a lot better than kerosene. And I know one of the problems with the kerosene is, so kerosene comes in at about a 42 cetane level, which a lot of people think maybe it's diluting the cetane package. But as we know in America, we generally have a 40 minimum rating on cetane. So it's not really killing the cetane all that much. but it has a lot lower BTU. So while the cetane in our fuel allows us to more completely burn the fuel, so that does a lot of benefits. It gives you more mile per gallon. It gives you less particulate and burn off to your DPF or out the pipe, reduces your regens, all that stuff. So we like to have our cetane high. So a lot of people argue it's got about the same cetane as diesel fuel does, but it has a lot lower BTU. So when the BTU drops, all those problems come right back. And then you can then leave a lot of carbon deposits behind in the fuel system as a result of the kerosene burning. And carbon deposits, now you have to get back into fuel system and injector cleaners to get these deposits out. You're creating more problem than you're solving. And that's the big thing with kerosene.
The big thing for me, like as a truck owner, is I want simplicity. Like there's no way that I'm going to know how to dose it correctly, or I'm not going to have access to the testing data that you have. So I just want one thing that I can use to treat my fuel. And I think there's so many different aspects to this that just make sense when comparing to some of those old school methods, right? So I get one product, I've got the cetane boost, I've got lubricity, I've got these other benefits to it, and it's cheaper too. So like, to me,
that's always the curveball. That's always the one that helps in the end there.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you brought this topic up because I've heard about it. People have mentioned it. I've never really had a conversation on the podcast about the ATF and 2-cycle and kerosene in the winter. So I appreciate the testing and the data that you guys have for it, so people can make an informed decision. They've got the data, they've got the costs, and they can make an informed decision, with it.
Absolutely.
I definitely want to link to the test data, so we'll put that in like the show description.
Sure, we'll get it all over to you.
Yes, people can check it out. They can see it. If people do have questions for you, because I know anytime we talk fuel additives, oil, anything like that, there's tons of opinions, questions, things people want. I always like to make sure that people know how to reach out to you guys and ask a question. What's the best way to do that?
You can reach us directly. We got an 800 number right on our website, hotshotsecret.com. You can call in. You can message us through our social media pages. You can email us, send a honing pigeon. I don't care. We love to solve problems. We're sad to hear that maybe you're having a problem, but we love when you bring it to us because we can either help you solve the problem or it might lead to new formulations and new products. And we like to kind of keep our ear to the street. That's why I'm out so much at a lot of these races and polls and industry stuff. It's not just for branding and promotion and stuff. It helps us keep our ear to the street and see problems happening and so forth. So we really encourage it. And we've got a lot of smart people here, a lot smarter than me. And should any question escalate, past us, we go right to the lab and we can have you talk directly to our tribologists. And we pride ourselves in it. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
I also heard there's a huge diesel event coming up that you guys are involved in, and there's supposed to be a whole bunch of really powerful diesel trucks coming up. I wanted to ask you about that.
I'm pumped about this. Yeah, it's actually not a diesel event, but No Mercy's coming up. It's the Ducks race down in South Georgia Motorsports Park. It's where some of our diesels have kind of gone down there in that gas world and stretched their legs. This big radial race down there, and Ryan Milliken's been racing that series for years now, so he's kind of carried the flag for the diesel industry. And of course, this last year he finished second in points in X275 and actually won No Mercy last year, won this race last year there. And Jared Ring with Frosty and the Cadillac, he runs that series. Johnny Montesino. We got a few guys that have kind of crossed over and kind of got the diesel word out there. But this year we're bringing an army down there. So Hot Shot Secret is sponsoring the live coverage on Flow Racing. So I encourage all of you diesel folks to tune into Flow Racing. I believe we've got over 25 diesel trucks invading South Georgia here. And it's going to be really cool. what we've done in the diesel industry and how far we've come on the drag racing and performance side, it's time for the world to see it. So we're going down there with an army, and should make some waves here, and let these diesels show these gas guys what's up. So we're really looking forward to having the whole diesel family down there to finish the season.
That's really cool. I'm gonna have to tune in, see what I can watch, find out. That's gonna be awesome. I love to see that level of competition and just kind of the merging of gas and diesel in this high performance arena that it's going to be taking place at. So that's going to be really, really cool. And like I mentioned before, I appreciate you wanting to talk about this, because it's something, with education. That's why we do the podcast. That's why you guys do a lot of what you do. It's just to educate people, give them the information that's out there, so that they can protect their investment and then also not waste money. So it was great to go through the ATF 2-cycle kerosene, understand the what it does, what it doesn't do, and then also be able to compare that to a dedicated, like, everyday fuel additive that you can use throughout the year. So appreciate your time today, Kyle. As always, love chatting with you, love learning, and look forward to chatting with you again.
Yeah, Patrick, thanks for having me on. We'll see you here again soon.
Don't forget, diesel fans, make sure and head on over to kershaw.kaiusa.com. Use code 40 TDP 2024 for 40% off MSRP. It's a great way to save some money, get some really cool gear. If you need a new EDC knife, one for hunting, fishing, around the job site, around the house, they've got you covered with a bunch of different choices for blade steel, blade shape, different handle designs, different opening mechanisms. We appreciate Kershaw offering that discount code just for you guys. So if you're in the market, save some money and get some cool gear. Also want to give a shout out to some of our Patreon supporters: Tyler Loewen of 23 Diesel, CUTTERUP Rob, J Cole, all of our other Patreon supporters, all of you who subscribe on YouTube and podcast apps. We appreciate all your support here in year 8 of the Diesel Podcast, and look forward to bringing you more of the content that you want to hear in 2024. Till next time, keep the shiny side up.